Welcome to Treadmill Talks with Shannon Maves, a podcast for athletes and fitness enthusiasts to pass the time during mind-numbing cardio while I use my no-bullshit coaching style to educate, inspire, and entertain. I'm your host, Shannon Maves. Now let's walk and talk. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Treadmill Talks. Today's episode is part 2 of the one where I fucked up. Last week, I went through all of the mistakes that I made during my first 3 preps. I did 5 shows, all of which were self-coached, and I made plenty of mistakes during those 3 preps. But I am not done yet. Oh no, don't worry. I still made plenty more mistakes during my next 4 preps. The first big mistake that I made during my 4th prep was ego lifting. I like to lift heavy. I like to feel like a fucking badass beast in the gym. I always kind of joke and say that I should have been a power lifter instead of a bodybuilder because I like to lift heavy and eat lots of food, which is still true. But I've definitely calmed down since 2019 when I bulged a disc in my back while deadlifting. Now, hear me out. Deadlifting is not bad for your back. Deadlifting can actually be very good for your back when you do it right. Any exercise can be bad for your back if you're doing it wrong, which I was. Maybe my form wasn't actually wrong. I don't know. I can't tell for sure because I wasn't recording myself when it happened, which is one of many reasons why I highly recommend recording your lifts, especially when you're trying to go heavy. Make sure your form is fucking flawless before you try to push max weight. One thing I do know for sure, though, about when it happened is that I pushed too hard too quickly. I didn't warm up sufficiently, and I let my stupid fucking ego take over, and I tried to go for a PR when my body was not ready yet. Bro, it fucked me up. Not just like for that day, or not even like a few weeks, but years. It took me about 2.5 years to fully recover from that shit. Back injuries are so fucked up. Like, your spine is kind of a super important part of your body. And when it's not healthy, your entire quality of life decreases. Sleep became more of a struggle. Getting on and off the toilet was kind of an ordeal. And the pain was just excruciating at times. Sometimes the pain wasn't too bad, though. And being the stubborn idiot that I can be sometimes, on those days that I felt better, I would try to push again. And I wouldn't even push like super hard, at least not what I considered hard at the time. But now I realize that pushing hard is relative. And when you have a fucking horrible injury like a bulged disc in your back, pushing hard might mean just deadlifting the bar. It took me about 6 months after the initial injury to finally come to terms with the fact that I needed to back off a lot for a while. I had to completely change my style of training, and I worked to gradually build strength back up around the injury. And I completely eliminated any type of deadlifts or hinging movements or anything where I was bent over like barbell rows. It sucked, and I lost a lot of glute muscle in the process because deadlifts and hinging movements are great for the glutes. But I learned a shit ton from this particular experience because this was actually also the same time that I was working alongside a physical therapist. So I was able to pick her brain a ton about what to do and not to do during my recovery. And I'm also the kind of person who learns really well when I fuck up firsthand. So now I kind of consider myself a pro at teaching proper deadlift form because I worked so hard to perfect that shit once I was finally able to do them again. And yes, I did build my strength back up and have since been able to match the PR that I was attempting when this happened. I'd actually say that I've beat that PR because my form is flawless now that I've worked so hard on correcting it. But yeah, I was in prep when all of this shit happened. And I just kept pushing, despite the fact that my body needed more food and fuel to heal itself. But I wanted my OCB Pro card that year. And I wanted to compete at nationals in NPC for the first time. So my stubborn ass just kept on going. I won my open class in an NPC competition last year, so I knew that I was going to win my OCB Pro card this year. Or so my cocky ass thought, because that fucking ego of mine was all of a sudden getting the best of me again. And I also had a certain someone who I believed and trusted telling me that they knew I was going to get my OCB Pro card. Like it was a fact. It was already in the bag. So I got kind of cocky. And when I didn't win the overall title at my first OCB competition that season, I was bummed. Okay, no, I was salty as fuck. Let's be real. I was pissed. So I kept going and I did another OCB competition. And the girl I had to battle in the overall was the same girl who placed second to me at that first show. So I figured, yep, it's mine this time. This is it. I'm done. Like, it's done. It's in the bag. No sweat. It's mine. Nope. She won. And I was a little twat about it. I didn't actually do or say anything that was too horrible, but I know that the expression on my face said it all. And I didn't congratulate the girl who won or handle the situation with grace at all, which I did end up regretting. And I later congratulated the girl who beat me, and I apologized for not being a better sport about the situation because she looked fantastic. And I really was happy for her. I was just being a fucking selfish and immature idiot in the moment. I'm not proud of that day. But I learned from it. I stopped chasing that pro card. And I started competing for me and focused on my journey and working towards achieving a pro level physique. If and when I achieve my pro card, I will be stoked. But that's truly not what it's about for me anymore. And I kind of hate that I had to make a mistake like that in order to get to this point. But I'm here now. And you better believe that I will never tell a client that they are going to win. Not that I don't believe in them. I'll make sure they know that I believe in them and that they're doing well. Because if they aren't doing well, I'm not going to let them step on stage. But you cannot tell someone that they are going to win because this is a subjective sport. And you never know who else is going to show up that day. So I want to make damn sure that my clients' heads are screwed on tight so that they keep their sights on the bigger picture and not on a fucking trophy or a pro card. Now, there's still actually an entire other part of this prep that was a huge learning experience for me. And that came when I competed at nationals in NPC for my first time. Whew. Good golly, Miss Molly, those shows are huge and competitive. I felt like such a small fish. But, I didn't feel like I didn't belong or anything. I think that despite everything, I actually held my own fairly well. And it really opened my eyes to the full sport of bodybuilding. Because you can do well at a regional show and still not be ready to compete nationally. I didn't realize until that moment how much your suit, hair, makeup, tan, and all of that other small stuff really does come into play in this sport. At the regional level, you can win an overall with a bad suit color or cut. You can win an overall with a hairstyle or makeup that doesn't totally complement your overall look. And you can even win an overall with mediocre posing at the regional level. But at the national level, where every single girl on that stage has placed either first or second in their open class, the competition gets stiff. And those little details matter a lot more when every girl out there has a bomb physique. My feedback from my first national show was that my posing hadn't evolved enough. My suit color was wrong, and my hair was too short. They did also give me feedback that I already knew, like I needed more size in my upper body and conditioning in my glutes. But hearing that the show day glam type of stuff is more of what kept me from placing was eye-opening. I study that shit so hard now. I'm always looking for trends with suits, changes in posing routines, and anything else that evolves in the bikini division. Not just to be a better competitor myself, but to be the best competition coach that I can possibly be. Whether or not all of my clients have taken my suggestions is another story, because I always tell them that they are ultimately allowed to do whatever they want to do because it's their journey, and they should do whatever is most enjoyable for them, because the sport should be enjoyable, which is ultimately the biggest lesson I learned that year. Have fun competing. Regional level shows are fun. National level shows are intense. Yes, they're fun, but it's a very different type of fun. And it's not going to be very fun for somebody who is competing just for shits and giggles. I am competing to get to a high level. That is my ultimate goal. But after that year, I knew I needed time to really get to that level, which is why I haven't done another national show yet. I was planning to last year, but life happened, and well, we'll get into that when we get into the mistakes that I made during my 7th prep. But now we're on to mistakes from prep number 5, which began in the year 2020, which was supposed to be a full year of life and travel and not competing for me. But COVID canceled all of those plans, and I could feel myself wanting to start eating my emotions during all of the shutdowns. So I actually decided to hire a new coach and start prepping, which ended up being a great decision because I don't even know what would have happened to me if I had let myself spiral. And this was an awesome prep. I loved my new coach and honestly didn't make any horrific mistakes this time, but there were still 2 fairly big mistakes that I did make, both involving food. The first one was macro hoarding. After doing a few preps, I had started to develop this fear of going to bed hungry. I hate going to bed hungry because it is impossible for me to fall asleep. So I would save a good chunk of my macros for my last meal of the day so that I could go to bed with a somewhat full belly. I thought that this was a great idea at the time because I can handle hunger during the day when I have more to distract myself with. But what ended up happening was it made my energy shit during the day, which means my workouts were shit. And I was grumpy and lazy and kind of an asshole most of the time, which is when I realized that, oh, hey, if I eat what I need when I need it, my body runs a lot more efficiently. Consuming more carbs around my workouts helped me push harder in the gym. Spacing my protein more evenly throughout the day helped to regulate my hunger and prevented energy crashes in the afternoon. And getting just slightly higher fats with my last meal was really all I needed to do to slow my digestion a bit so that I wasn't trying to fall asleep with a grumbling stomach. Now, these are all things that I could have read about or had my coach tell me. But for me personally, I think I needed to really feel all of this and experience it firsthand in order for it to really get drilled into my stupid fucking brain. So there's another happy little mistake that I'm glad I made, because now I structure my meals a lot more mindfully, and I can help my clients structure their meals according to their needs and their schedules. But I did make another stupid mistake during this prep, abusing refeeds, which isn't something I had ever done previously. When I prepped myself, I knew that refeeds needed to be structured. There was a purpose behind them. to restore glycogen, increase energy, lower cortisol, etc., etc. And I would have untracked meals like burgers, pizza, pancakes, or whatever I was craving, really. But I kept them within reason, knowing the purpose behind them. But my first coach didn't believe in untracked meals. All of my refeeds were controlled, and I would just be given a day here or there with slightly higher macros. And I think that both of these refeed strategies are awesome. But I also think that there is a time and a place for both of them now, which I'll explain in just a minute. Now, my second coach, who was coaching me through this prep, wanted me to have untracked meals for my refeeds. But since I had just finished working with a coach who wouldn't let me have any untracked meals, all of a sudden, this was like that forbidden fruit that I hadn't been allowed to enjoy for quite some time, and I abused them. If my coach told me to have a burger and fries for my refeed, I would get the biggest, juiciest, fattiest burger with the most insane toppings and the biggest order of fries that I could find. And this isn't to say that you can't eat like this. I still got lean as fuck during that prep, the leanest I had ever been to that point, actually. But because I was eating so much on my refeed days, we had to drop my macros even lower on all of the other days, which ultimately meant that I was being underfed on a regular basis, which led to muscle loss. And if you recall from last week's episode, the prep before this, I had injured my back, which had already reduced the size of my glutes. So even though I was able to get lean this year and do fairly well at my show, my booty was tiny. I needed a healthy back and a lot more food in order for my glutes to be full enough. Which is why I say that different types of refeeds are great. Some people do well with controlled refeeds, some people do well with untracked meals, and some people do well with a combination of both. They each have their time and place, though. And your mindset with food is a huge thing to take into consideration when refeeding. Because even though I had been great with untracked meals in the past, the restriction I experienced afterwards later caused me to go ham on an untracked meal. I have since learned a lot more about myself when it comes to this, and I will now communicate with my coach whether or not I feel like I am in a good enough headspace to take an untracked meal, or if I would be better off with a more controlled refeed. And we've worked a lot on eating intuitively again, and yeah, there's just been a lot that was learned from this combination of experiences. But my glutes needed to be fuller, and I ended up taking 2021 off from competing altogether to do just that, and to do some of the traveling that I had wanted to do in 2020. Now, by 2022, I was ready to compete again, and I started my sixth prep, which was another good prep for the most part, although I still made a handful of mistakes. The first one being that I didn't realize how much birth control fucks with your body. That was the first prep that I had ever done off of hormonal birth control. And everything that I thought I knew about my body essentially went out the window. All of the things that I had done in the past to get ready for a show suddenly weren't working this time. When I was like 4 weeks out from my first show, I knew I wasn't lean enough. So my coach pushed me, which had always worked in the past. But this time, my body fought me. And instead of dropping weight during that push, my body clung to it for dear life. And I ended up having to pull out of that first show and restructuring my entire season. Once we made the decision to drop that show, we increased my food and decreased my cardio to give my body a little bit of a break. And guess the fuck what? That's when my body decided to start dropping weight. Turns out what I actually needed was to ease off of the gas instead of pushing on it harder. Sometimes less really is more. And your body on hormones is not your real body. So, lesson learned there, and I pushed back my season. But 10 days before the first show that I actually competed at, my grandfather passed away. He was 96, so it's not like it wasn't expected or anything. But I love my grandparents, and death is never easy, even if you are prepared for it. So I was grieving. And while I don't regret doing that show, because my grandfather is really kind of the pioneer for weightlifting in my family, So I almost felt like I was doing it to honor his memory. In retrospect, I kind of guess I wish I hadn't done this show because I was trying to keep my focus on prep while I was also grieving. And I feel like I didn't give either of those things my best effort. I kind of numbed the pain of losing him by drowning myself in prep. But I was also distracted from prep because I was grieving. It wasn't the best I've ever brought to the stage, and I ended up having to deal with some emotions later on that I had suppressed down, which is an experience that I'm actually somewhat grateful for because I have now talked some of my own clients out of competing when I felt in my gut like it was not the best decision for them as human beings for whatever reasons. Because even as a competition coach, my clients are people first. Yes, they're athletes, but they're not robots. And I'm not the coach that's going to treat them like a robot. I will always keep their best interest in mind. And then if they fight me on it and they're like, no, Shannon, I still want to compete, then I'm not going to stop them. But at least I've expressed my concerns to them. I did make one other mistake this year that kind of ended up being a bit of a game changer for me as a coach, competitor, and just as a human. And that was under-consuming electrolytes, more specifically sodium. By the time I got to my 6th prep, my diet was pretty on point. I wasn't abusing macros or hoarding them or overeating during my refeeds anymore. And I was eating probably 99% single ingredient whole foods when I was in prep. But when your diet is, quote, clean, I hate that term, but I'm going to use it for a lack of a better word, you don't get much sodium. And when you're training hard and sweating a lot, and you're grieving and crying a lot, you lose a lot of water and sodium. And your body needs sodium to function. It regulates your blood pressure and heart rate, and it's also a big reason that some people get muscle cramps. Potassium has a lot to do with cramps too, but an imbalance of sodium to water can also cause muscle cramps, which is something that I got to experience on stage because I kept drinking water and eating my whole, clean foods, but I didn't get enough sodium. The second I hit my front pose on stage, both of my calves cramped up. It was so hard for me to get through that routine with a smile on my face. I was in pain. Even though my face was smiling, you could still tell that something was wrong. My posing was off because I physically couldn't hit my poses right. Good Lord, was that a learning experience? I did so much research on muscle cramps after that, which led me to researching sodium and electrolytes. And kind of like when I injured my back and became kind of an expert on deadlifting form, I now consider myself a bit of an expert on sodium because of the shit that I went through and the amount that I researched it afterwards. So hey, another happy mistake. Now my 7th prep was last year in 2023, and this was a very unique prep because it was the first one that I didn't get to see through to the stage. When I was 5 weeks out from the first show that I had planned, my husband got a job promotion that would relocate us to Florida, which was something that we had discussed and were hoping for, but the timing was shit because they wanted him to be out there in 5 weeks when I was 5 weeks out. So I made the decision to pull out of prep. At first I thought, okay, I'll just pause and maybe compete later in the year once I'm settled in Florida. But I didn't realize the mental, physical, and financial toll that such a move like this was going to have on me. And I didn't end up getting on stage last year, which was heartbreaking, if I'm being honest, because that prep was going phenomenally. Like, honestly, I hadn't really made any mistakes. My physique was looking insane. My body was responding great. And my mindset was fantastic. At 5 weeks out, I had already beat every single package I had ever brought to the stage in the past, which is really cool to say, and it was cool to experience, but not getting to showcase that on stage ended up kind of fucking with me. And there was a lot of times that I did not handle my reverse very well. Sometimes it was because of the stress of the move. Sometimes it was because of the sadness that I felt saying tough goodbyes and I would eat emotionally. Sometimes it was because I felt like I had failed by pulling out of prep, which would lead me to eat emotionally. But if I'm being honest, sometimes it was also just because I was having a little bit too much fun celebrating and exploring my beautiful new city. It's hard for me to say right now exactly what mistakes I made during this last prep, because I think I'm still kind of making some of them and I'm still kind of processing a lot of it. But I also think that a lot of what I experienced wasn't because of prep, but rather just a big life transition. Part of me feels like it was a mistake not to compete at all, because I totally could have just sucked it up and done a show once I moved out here. But the other part of me thinks that I did make the right decision, because this is a very unique time in my life and I wanted to really experience it without the distraction of prep. So I don't know. I'm still kind of going through it and processing it. I'm definitely going to compete again, just not right now. And I want to make sure that I am 110% in it whenever I do prep again. I want to have made such drastic improvements that I am almost unrecognizable on stage. Because I'm in this sport for the long haul, if you couldn't tell. And I'm sure that I'm going to make even more mistakes whenever I do decide to prep again. But that's kind of weirdly something that I love about this sport. Because you never lose, you either win or you learn. And even when you win, you still learn in this sport. One thing that I believe to be true is that if you look back on yourself from a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc., and you don't feel just a little slightly embarrassed by the mistakes that you made, then you probably haven't grown. Embrace your failures. Learn from them, grow from them, and use them to become a better athlete, coach, person, or whatever. But do not be afraid to fail. The master has failed more times than the beginner has even tried. Thank you for listening to Treadmill Talks. If this episode taught you something, lit a fire under your ass, or at least helped you forget how long you've been walking in place, please leave a review or take a screenshot to share on your social media. Don't forget to tag me @Shannon Maves so I can give you some love right back. And thanks again for listening to my Treadmill Talk.